coaching and ACT in coaching. So I'll be doing coaching, but also training and supervision for ACT coaches. So I will hand over at that point to Shane.
Thanks, Rachel. And hi, everybody. Nice to be here. My name is Shane O'Neill Hart. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I'm based in San Francisco, California. I guess I'll tell you a little bit about my background. So my background was doing psychotherapy, working in acute psychiatric settings, so inpatient psychiatry, partial hospitalization, intensive outpatient. And then I got into doing a lot of ACT training, receiving a lot of ACT training myself, and then starting to do supervision and training in my private practice. And then a couple of years ago, I joined Lyra Health, which is a mental health workforce mental health company. So what we do is we provide mental health benefits to employers. So for example, a company that we have a relationship with is Starbucks. Everybody who works at Starbucks who has benefits is eligible for a certain number of sessions, either with a coach or with a therapist. I lead the clinical team for our mental health coaching program at Lyra, which is what we call a blended care program. So it means that we're blending human support, meeting one-on-one with your coach, maybe once a week, with technology. So we do feedback informed care, assessment tracking in our platform, and then we have digital content. That's really the blended care part, digital content. So educational worksheets and videos and handouts that are incorporated into the care, and they're shared by the coach. So it's not like it's like an AI thing that's sharing it, but you might meet with your coach, you establish what you're going to work on, and then the coach might send you, here's some videos that have some more, information about your emotions and some skills for working with your emotions, and that kind of becomes a core component of the practice that the client is doing week to week. So my role in leading that program is really overseeing our training, overseeing our clinical policies, making sure that the clients that we're seeing in the program, because we are working with coaches that don't have clinical training, so trying to make sure that the clients that they're seeing are clinically appropriate and not in the clinical range for severe conditions like severe depression and anxiety, things like that. So I could probably say a lot more about my background, but I'm happy to be here and happy to talk about all different ways of thinking about coaching.
Cool. So as I said, Shane and I, we kind of thought there are a few areas that we feel are kind of big areas, and I'm not quite sure if you want to, should we kick off a bit of a discussion and then just sort of open up each of these areas? The bullet points are some of these big areas that we've been chatting about. How do you use technology to generalize what's going on in terms of behavior change, using ACT, using mindfulness, those sorts of things? So kind of generalizing that from a coaching session or coaching interactions over into somebody's life. So we think this is kind of like a big area within coaching and within, using technology in coaching. The other area that we thought was a big one that we can kind of spend some time around today is scaling interventions. It's probably the one that interests me hugely, as how do we use technology to allow us to open coaching and mental health support to more people, because we know that there is a deficit in care provision for the number of people who would benefit from mental health care. And then if we have time, maybe we could think about some of the ethical issues around using technology in coaching. So I've done a lot of talking, Shane. Shall I sit back a little bit and let you kick us off, chatting perhaps around that first bullet point that we talked about, that generalizing behavior change outside of the coaching sessions or formal coaching interactions?
Sure. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah. So in my context, and I think what's cool about the conversation we're having here is that Rachel has worked a lot in settings, or in a setting where the primary delivery mechanism was technology and a person interacting with an app, and really trying to take whatever we know from what human-based care, how they can integrate that into technology. My setting is the human is still a very core part of the care delivery process, and we're trying to use technology to assist it. And I think it's there's a whole spectrum, right? And different offerings along that spectrum. So in the setting in which I work, it looks like traditional coaching or therapy where you're meeting with your coach, having a discussion about what you're going to work on, doing maybe mindfulness exercises or other kinds of experiential work in session. But the way that we're really trying to bridge behavior change throughout the week is really this emphasis on between session practice, and the digital content creates this great bridge throughout the week. So it's like, okay, so we, obviously you never get to talk about all the things that you want to talk about in session. So it's like, oh, we didn't get to talk as much about the symptoms of depression that you're experiencing. I have this video that I can share with you that's actually going to provide some education on what depression is, and you might, learn some things about what you're experiencing and have a different perspective on how you could take care of yourself. And then at the beginning of our sixth session next week, we can debrief what you learned, how it was helpful. Similarly, worksheets like a thought record, things like that, having them do it throughout the week. It's not that different than what I think a lot of therapists and coaches do, but integrating it into our platform means that it's like, one, it's a basic expectation of it is the model of care, and two, there's good visibility to the coach to be able to see, in real time, like they completed the thought record and they're struggling, with thoughts of not being smart enough at work, and the coach is able to, in real time go in, see what the client wrote, maybe comment on it. I noticed that you're having some thoughts about feeling insecure at work throughout the week. This looks like something that'd be really helpful for us to debrief in our session. So it's kind of, I think, again, like just creating that bridge between the real life and the work. The last thing I'll say about the videos that we use at Lyra are that they're a particular kind of format of storytelling. So it's these characters, these animated videos with these characters who you get to know, who are going through kind of relatable life struggles, who are actually engaging in a conversation in the video with their own coach. So they're kind of, the client's getting a sense of like what the relationship between a client and their coach can look like, the types of conversations that they have. And then through that, the coach is kind of offering certain skills, like maybe mindfulness skills for responding to stress and difficult thoughts and feelings. And it's both teaching and kind of modeling for the client, like what this relationship could be like, what the kinds of things that you can bring up with your coach are. And it really just, I think what it does is it doesn't replace anything that the coach is doing, but it really enhances the conversation that the coach and the client is able to have. And it gives the client some foundational psychoeducation, which is, if you talk to your clients, like many of us I know have a spiel, like if we're going to talk about stress and how stress impacts the body, or if we're going to talk about the relationship between our thoughts and our emotions and our actions, like those are things that we probably say over and over and over again. And so that's something that's really scalable about using video lessons, is that things that we say over and over again can be put in a video shared with the client. And then the conversation that we have in real time could be something that's more dynamic and more individualized. What do you think about that, Rachel? How does that kind of similar to and different from the work that you've done in this area?
Similar. So we also had hybrid interventions that we were testing. And I used to use this phrase, technology augmented coaching. So like you were saying, you're not replacing the coach in those interventions, but you're really augmenting what can be done. And there is a literature around just-in-time interventions, which if anyone's not familiar with, I really recommend getting on Google Scholar and having a look at what's being done in that space. And this for me is where I think the technology can be very powerful if you're using it in conjunction with a human care provider of some description. But I also think perhaps the technology on its own is that it's kind of crossing over into somebody's life, because we're all carrying these little mini computers around that give us access to, and we're becoming more used to consuming things through things like Spotify, through Headspace, through all these different media. And that's becoming a norm across a lot of groups. So I think there's a few things that I would add. Do you know what, Shane, when I was thinking, I was like, this is such a joy co-presenting with you. You're so kind of like knowledgeable and talented. I was like, what else can I add to this? But one of the things that I was thinking about is that ability to kind of bring content into people's lives in a way that we are used to consuming it. So that might make it more easy to connect with certain groups that are traditionally more difficult to engage in mental health self-care. It might also allow us to cascade these kinds of psychological skills that we're teaching people in coaching. I'm coaching, there's lots of different kinds of coaching. So I'm using coaching kind of short form for like CBS type coaching, which is very psychological and developmental and more transformational than some skills coaching. So just to clarify what my mental shorthand is. So I think being able to cascade more adaptive ways of working. So let me give you a concrete example of that. In the randomized control trial that we ran at Headspace, where we were working with, unfortunately, it was an intervention that didn't get commercialized. It never actually got launched formally, but we were testing it, and that was working with people who had chronic health problems. And if anyone was at Worldcon, I presented some data as part of a symposium that Corey very kindly put together. So what we found within that RCT is that people were doing the sort of coaching in the app with their kids, for example. So they were having, their Headspace time as a family, or they were using the metaphors that we were giving them on the program. We were using things like the choice point, or, this idea of stepping into the swamp, all very familiar metaphors that I would expect this group to know pretty well. And people were like using this with their kids and their families. And that for me is a very powerful part of this. And I'm sure it happens in traditional kind of coaching contexts. I think it's so much easier when you've got, you're carrying it around with you on your phone, and you can do that content again. You've got this sort of, maybe a recording or an exercise or something which you can go back to in the moment. And that's one of the things that I think is very powerful about using technology. The only other thing that I was going to lead a little bit of a discussion into was this idea of working alliance. So again, I'm really fascinated by the fact that people are creating a working alliance with things like Woebot. I just think that's amazing. Knowing that it's a complete AI, and of course AI is becoming more and more common in our kind of in our world as well. A lot of that is within the technology space. So this idea that we can actually have a helping relationship with an AI, knowing it's an AI, I think that's really interesting as well. And so this idea, we see this a lot. When I was at Headspace, we would see a lot of people have a relationship with either Andy or one of the other meditation teachers. They kind of develop this, what is arguably a one-sided relationship, but they feel it is a strong or helpful relationship that they have with these virtual teachers. I just think that's fascinating that you can kind of use technology to support people in that way. But I'll stop there, because otherwise I'll go into our next bullet point about scalability.
Well, I'll make a comment on that because I think there's something that's an interesting counterpoint to what you're saying. So if people can develop a relationship with an AI, a well-designed AI, I assume, right? Like a lot of thought has gone into designing it so that it feels human, that it feels relatable. On the other side, what I've seen has been an interesting thing where there's elements of technology that our clients interface with that are not AI, but that feel robotic to them. So for example, in our program, we have safety kind of protocols around, if a client has suicidal thoughts shows up on the PHQ-9, we have a process, not an automatic process that's like an automatic alert, but a process that the coach follows where they will communicate with that client to let them know, we noticed that you're having suicidal thoughts and I want to get you connected to a therapist who has the right kind of training to support that. And that's always a message that's delivered by an actual human. It's not like a computer's delivering it, but clients often feel like it was an algorithm that decided this for them. And they sometimes feel like it's impersonal. And so we have this challenge of like, how do we we don't want to wait until the next session when we know how the client has suicidal thoughts. We want to address it immediately. We want to say, we have people you can call right now 24/7 who can support you. But we also don't want it to feel like it was this automated message that was created by a computer. And so it's kind of interesting that how people interpret, like, was this, so it's interesting that an AI could make people feel like it's individualized and it's relatable for me, and a human could actually make them feel like this was robotic and this was not individualized to me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think, so this was the final study in my thesis. We looked at working alliance in a kind of, in a serial mediation with psychological flexibility. And honestly, being completely transparent, I expected working alliance to account for some variance in the model. And actually it didn't. It didn't. As soon as you put them in this parallel mediation model, all of the change was accounted for by psychological flexibility. And that surprised me. So I had, as you do in your PhD, you're like, oh, okay, I was not expecting that. Right, go back to the literature. And actually there is some really interesting work. No, there's very little that's actually been looking at this as a kind of, we've got one account for behavior change, which is working alliance, and coaching talks a lot about that being a mechanism of change. And I was comparing that with psychological flexibility, which I would say is a more developed, more kind of sophisticated argument, with a little bit more evidence around it. But the psychological flexibility kind of, the explanation, or the kind of where I landed with this is, what's happening is it's the transformation of stimulus function is creating the change. And so you can get that from another person, or you can get it from a book, or you can get it from a conversation with somebody, or you can get it from a conversational AI. And I think based on the data that we saw, that explanation seems to fit a little bit better. And it really works in terms of the RFT explanation of that behavior change, transformation of stimulus function. And that's what's really interesting. Well, again, that edges us towards the conversation around scalability. And I just want to pull us back and keep us in this space for a little bit longer in case there are questions from the floor. But yeah.
Yeah, should we stay with this question before moving on and see what comments and questions people have?
Unless everyone's like, no, this is really dull. We're not interested in this.
There was one from iPhone, whoever iPhone is, a question. Do you give copies of sessions to those you meet with for review between sessions? I wasn't sure exactly what this question meant. I wasn't sure if it was for me. I assume it was for me because I was talking about the clients and sessions. If you mean recordings of sessions, or do you want to clarify that?
Yes, that is exactly what I mean. Previously, there's been a history of back when tape recordings were digitally tapes, providing clients tape recordings and then phone recordings. Of course, if you had a video recording, that would be some additional technological addition to voice alone. And the point of having the session to review is that in reviewing it, clients often see things or hear things they did not previously recognize, and also they have review so that they can be reminded of things that were discussed previously.
Yeah, thanks so much for the clarification. So we don't do that, though we do record our sessions with clients' consent, so clients can always choose to not have it be recorded, but if they accept it, we do record our sessions so that we can do quality assurance, so that my team that does clinical oversight of the program can make sure, if there's something going on, we can actually go in and watch firsthand from the client's words what they're reporting, so that we're not getting it secondhand from the coach. But I love the idea. And one product feature that we have asked for, which is something I hope that we'll get in the future, would be the ability to just like kind of when you're in the platform, just like press a button and record a section, like maybe a mindfulness exercise, and then just have that sent to them as an audio file. And I think that integrating that and making that really seamless could probably increase the behavior of doing an exercise and then sharing it with your client, if you don't have to do maybe the extra work of downloading the MP3 and emailing it, or whatever you might do.
Okay, thank you very much. And how about you?
For me, I was just thinking, we didn't record the sessions that the coaches had with the individuals, but a lot of it was text. So they had 3 video calls. This is in the intervention for people with chronic health conditions. So the context was, it was a lifestyle and meditation and ACT-based coaching program for helping to improve chronic health conditions. So we weren't trying to get rid of the migraines or the IBS or whatever it was that people had, but just helping them to make lifestyle changes, that evidence-based lifestyle changes that are shown to help people reduce the frequency and the duration and the kind of impact on their quality of life. So we didn't record the sessions that people had with their guide, but what they were recording, and I think this is really powerful, is that they would be text inputting with their coach. So that would be recorded, they could review that. And they would also be asked to text input into the exercises that we were giving them in the app. And one of the reasons for that is, I believe quite strongly, it's a good diffusion technique. You know, I'm not only having to think about what it is that I feel or what's going on for me or what my values are, I'm having to label them and essentially kind of creating that dialogue. So I'm very keen in coaching for my coachees to kind of own the language that we're using, because I know that will make it a little bit more powerful for them in terms of creating that transformation of stimulus function. So that's what we did. And people were able to review that. I think they could certainly look at their text conversations with the coach, and we would get them to kind of reflect on these things repeatedly in the program. So that's sort of coming back to, you said this was really important, and giving them that information again, in the hope that that will help to, you know, add that into their network of meaning and help them to see situations or choices in a different way.
Thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Maddie. I see you have your hand raised. Feel free to just jump in.
Yeah. First of all, thanks so much, guys, for this wonderful session. And I'm really passionate about using technology for mental health and coaching. I thought I would share a couple of my experiences, very much in relation to what you guys just discussed. The first one is about using technology exclusively for intervention purposes, and versus a hybrid model where you have the interventions delivered over a phone or a web program, but a human calls that client every now and then. So I tried that myself when I was taking a depression course. Apparently I was depressed and I was looking for a technology intervention, and I took this course which had a weekly program. Contents are delivered online, but a person calls me every Wednesday at certain time, a therapist, and then he checks with me how the program is going, and how I am doing with learning and using the interventions in my daily life. I found that very helpful. So what it meant was that I know that there is some human behind all this program, and there is someone there to care for me. That really helped. The technology part kind of kept me going, right? Every day I get some sessions, and then I was going through all that. So I found a hybrid model of using technology and human intervention was very effective for me, at least. And I am into digital mental health for quite some time. I had developed apps for mental health, And when it came to the identifying suicidal thoughts and conveying it to people, there was one app that we developed where it didn't have any assessment, but we were just asking about, it's for kids. So there were problems, a list of problems that the kids can choose from. And then we asked them to rate how complex or how severe that issue is. And internally, we had an algorithm that kind of sees if the kids are at risk, and it leads them to a chat interface in the app itself, so they can chat with a person, a counselor or someone, straight away from the app through the intervention, or it takes them to a form where they can fill in some details and someone would contact them. A counselor or someone would contact them. So still the anonymity is maintained, but we let them know that help is out there and they can reach out. So that's I found that very much similar to what Shane discussed. And the last experience, the latest one I'm experiencing is using an app for coaching purposes. A brilliant idea. So what happens here is every week they introduce a new course, a video session. There is a community feature within the app. So what we do, we go through the video sessions on particular days, and then we share the experiences with the community within the app. And every day the app gives us a coaching challenge, which unlocks a certain time of the day. So we have to wait till the challenge opens up. So there is an element of engagement which makes me wait for the challenge to come up. So I open it, I get into the app, take the challenge, and it keeps me engaged for the whole day, right? The first challenge opens at 9 o'clock in the morning, the second one at 3 in the afternoon. So if there is, if say, just imagine if I want to practice mindfulness or get to the present moment or something like that, this was really helpful. And there is a community aspect there, and the coach himself comes into response to our comments in the community channel. So the intelligence here is that the coach, he has actually video recorded everything. All the sessions are video recorded, and it is kind of delivered at set times, but he's still available for getting feedback or for having a conversation at his own time. I can send a message in the community feature, and the coach can respond to me at any time. I found that really interesting. The way they have designed the app was really good. So I being passionate about using technology for health and coaching, I think a lot of potential is out there, and the right design is what matters. I had used apps that are like dumb, you don't go into the app the second time, but the current app, it's keeping me engaged. It's a 7 weeks program, and it's a brilliant thing. So I would encourage everyone to try technology for coaching. It has got a lot of potential there. And thank you both for listening my long
I know, it's fascinating, and I think you're touching on some really important points there. Actually, I made some notes. I was like, accountability. Being able to use the technology to create that accountability, or creating the accountability through that community aspect. We're all in this together. We're going on this journey together. So much more likely to turn up. And I think the research that's been done looking at technology on its own versus some kind of human guide or coach or, a care practitioner of some sort, it's unequivocal. We get much better engagement and retention when there's a human going on that journey for us. So, augmented interventions could be the way forward. I think what I would say in response, though, is that, well, firstly, are you paying for this? experience? I bet money that you are. And you're paying quite a lot or not so much, or?
That's the interesting fact. You see, the apps that we developed are for they came out of research projects, so it's available for public. So it's out there. It was developed for helpline services, and the coaching app that I'm trying now, it was on I don't know, it was for free. I think the coach is kind of promoting his services. I'm not sure, but it just came up through a coach friend of me, and we are trying that app. And interestingly, it is it is super surprising, right? So you get these for free. You can't believe it, right? But maybe later you learn something from it, and maybe if I like the program, I'm going to sign up for more. Yeah.
Well, I think the point that I'm going to raise is that, and I might actually knock this over and see what Shane thinks in a sec, but when we were looking at scaling this intervention, which most of Headspace, it's just the software. Headspace has joined with Ginger now. They are going to be doing more of these sort of augmented interventions in the future. But at that time, it was the first time we were looking at scaling on a very large scale, human care provision, the hybrid model with the technology. And when you want to be able to pay your practitioners an ethically kind of okay amount of money, then you have to charge a certain amount for the service. And so that's when you start to get these questions around practitioner burnout. Are we going to be overloading our coaches versus, you know, are we going to make something which is going to be at the right price point for people? Or indeed, is it even going to hit our values as an organization to create something which is accessible for people who can't necessarily afford to pay something? So I think there's those issues around there. But like I said, Shane, I might see what you think about that, because obviously Lyra's model is it's very much human care providers, isn't it? So I wonder if you grappled with this yourself.
Yeah, and we do at Lyra also have like our own self-care kind of thing that we're building out, which is a library of resources like mindfulness exercises and digital content that you could navigate on your own. But our model is also an employer sponsorship based model, which basically it's like your health insurance in the United States, which I know that there's different delivery methods, different delivery models in different countries. We have, obviously, no surprise, a broken mental health and a healthcare system, broken healthcare system in the United States. So people are very dependent on their employer for these benefits. And historically, most people have been able to get healthcare, and a lot of people have not been able to get good mental health care. And now Lyra has been able to provide, you know, pretty good mental health care through your employer, but it still has, you know, that has limitations for some people who don't have access to that. But it definitely is increasing access, you know, to people who are lower income and working class. What I was going to say about, you know, the point you're bringing up, Maddie, is I think, like I said before, there's really a spectrum. There's many different ways to configure. You know, if we're calling it hybrid, doesn't necessarily mean 50-50, right? And one thing that we did create within our coaching program 2 years ago is something we call guided self-care, which we were like, well, we have this library of content that you could navigate on your own, but how do we start people? And so what we do is we hold a single session with a coach. And it's an hour long, and it's like, what are your goals? What are the one or two things that you really want to work on? And how does it fit into basically a 6-week care plan that you come up with your coach, which is like, this week so, you know, it's kind of like a curriculum that they design collaboratively with you. And then the client goes off on their own. Each week they have different content that they engage with, and then they have messaging access with their coach that they can follow up, and then they can do one more appointment if they want to. At any point, they could really transition into the full coaching program if they wanted to. But I've been surprised. I mean, it hasn't been a huge program, but for a subsection of people, it's the right amount of engagement. They wouldn't be able to fit in weekly sessions or even bi-weekly sessions, and they appreciate that they can do it on their own time. But they also have the accountability. They have established a relationship and set some goals with the coach, and then they have the accountability of kind of messages each week. The coach is checking in, and if they don't do something, they say, hey, you know, do you have some time to follow up on the lesson plan that we talked about this week? And I've actually been impressed that the outcomes we're actually hopefully going to publish, we've published research on the outcomes for our mental health coaching program. But I think we have enough data at this point to publish for the guided self-care program. And I've been really impressed that the outcomes are as good as they are. I wasn't sure how effective a program where we're only having one session with the coach would be.
I think that would be incredible research to get out there, because again, it's just sharing the knowledge that's now coming forward from having these kinds of interventions. Maddie, everybody wants to know what that coaching program is. There's many requests for more information.
No, it's you can look it for yourself. It's called PQ. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of it. It came from a friend of mine, but I think they're doing this regularly. It's called. I'll just quickly share that with you guys.
Yeah, pop a link in the chat.
I'll do that. Yeah.
And Alicia's asked a question. She says, I'm curious if you've seen differences in engagement between the self-guided versus coached content. I personally haven't researched that. I've been looking more at the Headspace intervention that which was a hybrid intervention, so there was both. But what I do know is that what we see with Headspace is really strong engagement with the people it works for. So I think that's really reinforcing the point you just made, actually, Shane, that for a subset of people that it really works for, it works amazingly. But I kind of was, I'm not frightened of being the voice of dissent in a room, which you may get to see that in action today, who knows. But one of the things I was saying is that really with Headspace, what we were seeing a little bit of was survivor bias, and we were kind of designing for those individuals and not necessarily designing for the people who didn't make it past. And it's literally like it's the first week. It has a big impact on whether or not someone will stay and engage with the app, and whether or not they won't. So one of the things we were getting really interested in is cues, which we haven't talked about yet. The ability that we can use technology to kind of, you get that little notification up on your phone. That can be really helpful. As a psychologist, I'm sure I wouldn't be the only one who is a little also concerned about the ethical implications of that with technology addictions and that sort of stuff. So I think, there's a few things going on there for me. There's always the good and the bad with technology, which is why we could edge into many conversations around ethics in this space as well.
Just a few comments on that and to respond to that question. So differences in engagement between self-guided versus coach content. So we haven't published on this, but we have analysis of it. If we compare like the amount of pieces of content that a client engages with in our coaching program versus the guided self-care program that I was describing. So the program where they meet once versus the program where they meet weekly, the engagement is definitely higher in the program where they're meeting weekly, which makes sense. Each week, right? You're having a conversation. Are you willing to watch this video this week? Are you willing to do X, Y, and Z? And then how did it go? Oh, you didn't do it, right? Like, how can we make sure that you do it this week, right? That level of support really enhances the engagement. But for a subsection of people, they are really engaged with something self-guided. So I think it's really important to just think that like different interventions for different people are going to work. And then the question about, is there any research about the impact effective digital resources? Not sure if this is exactly what you're asking, Julie, but in the program that's the sister program to the program I work, so we have the blended care coaching program, which is the program that I work in. At Lyra, we have a blended care therapy program, which is a similar structured program where licensed therapists work with more severe mental health problems. And we've published some research that shows that there actually is a relationship between the more pieces of content that the client engages with, it increases, or it leads to a further decrease in PHQ-9 and GAD-7 scores. What's interesting is actually that the effects of watching a video lesson, a 10-minute educational video lesson, lasts longer than having a session with your coach or your therapist. So it's like, it's not a huge effect, but it was a significant enough effect that there's something about the video that maybe seems to be longer lasting than what you work on with your therapist in session, which was really curious. So that's something I think we have access to a lot of data, so something we'll definitely continue to publish research on.
I think you've got a follow-up question there, Shane. I don't know if you want to tackle that while we're kind of focused.
This is more anecdotal. I wouldn't be able to say like we've done like a huge analysis to find out exactly, but I would say like anecdotally from what I've heard within the program, we've had a couple thousand people in that program, in the guided self-care one. They're self-starters. They're people who are really busy, who you know, who are usually, I think, people who are employed, probably people who are employed in you know, I don't want to use the word higher skilled, but technology kinds of jobs, like people who are using technology on a regular basis as part of their job, and who are pretty motivated and just want to like go on their own path and kind of access support as they need it. So I would say they're probably not the typical profile of the kind of person who comes to therapy necessarily, like, because people who come to therapy usually want the level of support that they're getting and really the interaction, the validation that they're getting from meeting with the therapist. So they're definitely more action oriented than the typical client, I think.
We saw a similar thing at Headspace in terms of the typical user profile. It was younger, it was usually female, it was generally white, generally affluent, professional, comfortable with digital technology. And, you know, we did really well in that space, but that's a very, very narrow profile. Which actually one of the things that's popped into my head, and I really think this is something that I learned so much about when I was at Headspace is, you know, I'm a scientist. I feel like I'm probably in a room with a lot of other scientists and a lot of practitioners and people who come at this from a really well-meaning, like, I want to make everybody's lives better. But I'm not necessarily going to be able to do that in a very engaging way. This is what I've learned. This is a development point for me as a practitioner. One of the things that I think Headspace has done really well is to make things engaging and beautiful. And, you know, they use the word delightful. We want to make it delightful for people. And honestly, some of the interventions that I've seen coming out of academic studies, they're not hitting that mark. And I do think there's a point there that if we want these things to be useful to people and engaging and delightful to use, there's a whole question around the UX that we're using. And I think industry is doing that really well compared to the academic type of interventions that I see where they are not beautiful, not easy to use, not engaging, generally kind of clunky and slightly garish. So I just wanted to make that point, that I think there's a whole area around technology which can help. You know, there's people who are really well versed in how you make these things usable and attractive, which me as a scientist, I'm not good at that stuff generally. You might be multi-talented people. Sadly, I'm not.
It's this funny thing that I find myself in meetings often where, you know, we're designing some aspect of the product that has important clinical implications, like who are the people that we're going to recommend for this type of care? And I go into those meetings thinking like, well, I'm the clinician here, I'm the expert. And then I'm in with a bunch of design people who are like, well, the way you want to do it doesn't work. It's not consistent with best practices of how, you know, how people interface with it. So you want to ask this question in this way, but like, that's not the way we're going to design it. So it's just been this interesting and humbling experience to what you're saying, Rachel. It's a hugely important part of it. That's just a different skill set for being a clinician, even from being, you know, the kind of research that you do is much more in depth than what I've done.
Yeah, and I'm seeing that comment from Wendy. You know, in academia, you don't necessarily have all of that. I agree. I would say so. And I do think that's perhaps where these kinds of partnerships with organizations who have got all the data, but not necessarily the time to get it out there, you know, there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot of crossover, I think.
Manny has a question. I see he has his hand raised.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I once again, I have something to share here for Julie's query. Actually, there are a lot of evidence around effectiveness and efficacy of digital interventions. So I'm a part of e-health research in the university, and we have been developing a lot of resources in that area. So first thing, there is a lot of evidence that digital interventions work. The second one, in terms of profiles, when I started my research, I was focusing on young people, and they are more, they carry their phone all the time and they feel more comfortable with the phone. So we did find that young people are more inclined towards using a digital intervention than meeting a person, right? So that is interesting research in that area as well. And interestingly, Rachel, in my research, in my PhD, I was looking at mindfulness apps, and Headspace was one of the top apps that came up. So I can vouch for the design aspects of Headspace.
Yeah, I think one of the things they do very well is getting the evidence plus the aesthetic. I think they do that well.
Yeah, the one of the challenges we have faced in most of our researches is keeping the clients engaged, especially even with young people, right? So when you're having apps, there are hundreds of apps that are coming out every single day, and so you give them an app to use, they'll be using it for say maybe a week, and then some other app comes up, and that's better designed and it has got a lot of other features, and they just move on. So it's really tricky to keep someone engaged with the app for a longer time to see the effect of the intervention. So so we did find that people who are using the apps for a longer time have better effects on them. And also there is a lot of dropouts, right? So some people don't even use it. Like, things put off, say when you log into an app, it asks you set up a profile and then asks you a series of questions. No, young people, they just get out of the app the moment you ask them more questions, right? So so there are a lot of strategies around how you keep them engaged. Before asking them any questions, you get them hooked up first, and then you get into assessment or asking them more at a later stage. Yeah.
I think I just want to double click on that for a minute, because this was a discussion we were having at Headspace just as I left, and it was around, there was a resistance to asking questions. And then, of course, there was a challenge because you were onboarding people without really knowing anything about them. So for a lot of the Headspace members, we didn't know their age or gender or anything. And one of the things we were looking at doing was, using data to be able to predict needs and behaviors, and, really tailor somebody's experience to things that might make it better and more enjoyable or more engaging for them. I don't know if you found the same thing, Shane. There is this kind of resistance to asking these questions. And actually, I think, I can't pull the research out of my head, but my understanding is that it's about what that's being used for. So people are very happy to give you data about them if they see a reason why, like, you're going to use this. So what you have to say to people is, we're going to personalize your experience. And they are then very willing to give you that information. So I think it's about perception, and it's about the utility of that, and whether or not it's worth me giving, an organization my data. Am I going to get something valuable out of that? And if the answer is yes, my perception is yes, then actually it's not necessarily true that they'll just log out. I don't know, Shane, what do you think?
Yeah, I deal with this in a particular tension that we have between the amount of data that we want to get up front so we can make a recommendation for what the right level of care is. And ideally, from a clinical perspective, I want us to know as much as possible so we can really say with confidence that coaching is the right approach for you, because you're struggling with more mild or moderate mental health challenges versus more severe mental health challenges where we should recommend that you work with a therapist. We want to get that recommendation right. So we do ask for a lot of information up front, but I would always want more. And what the feedback that we get from our user research team or user design team and from clients is that we're asking a lot of personal questions and they have no relationship with us. Why are you asking me about PTSD symptoms within the first 5 minutes of me logging onto this website? And a lot of people find that so, you know, people may drop off at that point, and then we don't, you know, we do look at that data of who logs in, who drops off, but we're not reaching those people who drop off. So we have this tension. So once they get into the coaching program, we do another kind of assessment with the PHQ-9 GAD-7 and some other things that we do that might lead us to recommend that they transition to a therapist, meaning that we have this rate of what we call the escalation rate, the number of people who get recommended coaching and then have to transition to therapy. I would love to see that number be as low as possible, but there's this balance because we don't want to turn people off at the beginning by giving them an extensive assessment that might do a better job, but might actually lead some people to not seek care because they have to fill out 30 minutes of questionnaires before they book with a provider. So that's one of the tensions that we're dealing with. But in general, you know, the context for people, it's a little bit more like going to your doctor's office than it is signing up for Headspace, right? Because the idea is you're going to be connected to a provider. And so hopefully people have that sense that, you know, we're going to, and we're treating that information the same as if it's part of your medical record. But people don't necessarily know what they're signing up for exactly. You know, it's just a website to them. And so they're like, we have to do a lot of work to really try to orient them.
And I would also say when Ginger and Headspace came together, that was so clear that what people were willing to tell Headspace was not the same as they were willing to tell Ginger, because the context was different, and we know how important context is. Oh, Maddie, we'll have to pay you later. You're just like contributing hugely. Thank you so much for a very vibrant discussion. I know we've got like 2 minutes left. Corey, did you want to take questions from the floor, or did you want to do any kind of wrap up? Or
well, we don't have a date yet for our next meeting, but if you do want to, if you enjoyed today, you're interested in joining more events like this, feel free to join our listserv and our Slack channel. I just linked our group website, so you can join and find all the links you need over there. But if you have any questions or you can't find what you're looking for, always feel free to email me. I'm dropping my email in the chat. And we would love to see more participation in our Slack group. So our Slack group's a little quiet right now, but I mean, I think we had such a lively discussion here today, and it'd be lovely to see that continue on in the interim between these meetings, right, in that Slack channel. So even if you just like a random idea pops into your head, or you have something you've kind of been like munching on, but it'd be helpful to kind of bounce ideas around with others, we would love to see the Slack group used more in that kind of fashion. Thank you, Rachel, and thank you, Shane, for joining us and kind of leading this discussion and getting us just thinking more about these ideas, right, and how to implement these ideas. I know I have plenty of questions and things I didn't even get to ask today, right? I'm interested, for example, in like, how do you form these collaborations between like research and industry to like develop maybe the ideal scenario, right, where you have these like all the resources, but then you have the time to actually like run these like well-ran trials or analyses. And you know, there's so many open doors we didn't get to chat about, but I think it's such a huge topic, and so it was nice to just like, I guess, hit at least the tip of the iceberg and get us thinking. Any other thoughts from anybody before we close out?
Well, I know I've done an awful lot of talking, but I just wanted to say thank you for coming to everybody. I hope it was useful. Thank you, Shane. Brilliant discussion. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Corey, for organising it. And thank you for everybody for contributing and being here and participating.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. It's great to be here with you. And Corey, thank you for organizing. And Rachel, great to chat with you today.
Thank you all. Take care.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.